It's good to be back with you in this second hour of Chris Jansing Reports. At this hour, Donald Trump's first verdict of 2024, not from a courtroom, but from Iowa. Will he put the competition on ice, and could the bitter cold freeze out a lot of voters? We're live in sub-zero Iowa. The post-caucus push. Ron DeSantis says his campaign is built for the long haul, where he's headed after the first votes are cast. Plus, Granite's state of mind. The New Hampshire primary just 8 days away. Can Nikki Haley pull off a big upset? We're live in Manchester. And tragedy at the border. U.S. officials firing back after they say Texas kept the feds from helping a woman and 2 children who died crossing the Rio Grande. Our NBC News reporters are following all the latest developments, but we begin with Donald Trump getting a warm embrace from frigid Iowa. NBC's Garrett Haake is just north of Des Moines. Garrett, what is the former president saying in his closing pitch?
Good afternoon. From what will shortly be a Donald Trump Jr. event here today in Ankeny, as the Trump team tries to lock in the results of what we've seen in poll after poll over the last couple of weeks. A dominant lead here in the Hawkeye state. At his last major rally yesterday, Donald Trump basically tried to welcome in all the disparate elements of his movement here in this state, be they first-time caucus goers, evangelicals, and sort of the breadth of the folks who have committed to caucus for him so far, and warned primarily against their biggest enemy here, which he views as complacency. Listen to what he told a crowd in Indianola yesterday.
These caucuses are your personal chance to score the ultimate victory over all of the liars, cheaters, thugs, perverts, frauds, crooks, freaks, creeps, and other quite nice people. Once you set foot in that caucus site, the entire world will be listening to you, and I believe that Iowa is going to speak loud and clear. You're first in the nation for a reason.
Chris, presumably in that laundry list of people he wanted folks to score points against are Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. The former president spent a significant amount of time going after his former UN ambassador Haley at that same rally yesterday, trying to put some distance between he and her in this state. And again, really warning folks that despite the cold, despite what they read or see on TV or hear about in the polls, that they do have to come out and actually caucus tonight, that they cannot take anything for granted, in part because he and his team, up until about a week ago, have been raising the expectations for his performance here so high.
Garrett Haake, always great to see you. Thank you so much. In the meantime, Ron DeSantis is already zeroing in on his post-caucus fight against his rival, Nikki Haley. NBC's Dasha Burns is in West Des Moines, where DeSantis will be holding his caucus party tonight. So it's not enough that they have a little thing called a caucus tonight, and the results matter a little bit. But they've already gone ahead, and they're trading barbs over what happens next. Tell us about it.
Well, look, let's take a little step back here, Chris, because Ron DeSantis is the candidate that at the outset of this primary was a rising star in the Republican Party. He was the guy that everyone was looking to unseat Trump as a standard bearer of the Republican Party. And he was the guy that was saying not so long ago that he was going to win Iowa. Now he's campaigning here as the underdog. He's fighting for second place for that mantle to take on Trump, not just nationally, but in this state where he has gone all in with all of his resources. This is certainly not where he thought he was going to be. And he's trading barbs, not with the frontrunner, Donald Trump, but with Nikki Haley as they're fighting it out for second place. Take a listen to the two of them talking about the next step here, because instead of going straight to New Hampshire, DeSantis has decided he's going to go straight from Iowa to South Carolina. No doubt an attempt to sort of taunt Nikki Haley on her home turf. Take a listen.
You know, obviously, New Hampshire has 20 delegates. Iowa has 40. South Carolina is a big deal. Nevada has a caucus. I'm participating. Donald Trump's participating. Nikki Haley's not even participating in that show. She'll win 0 delegates in Nevada. The whole name of this game is to win a majority of the delegates. So we're competing for every delegate we can.
I mean, he's only played in Iowa. He's invisible in New Hampshire. He's invisible in South Carolina. He's 4th and 5th place in both of those. I mean, I welcome him to South Carolina, but we're headed to New Hampshire. That's the next state that votes. Somebody might want to tell him that.
And look, it seems that both of them have made the calculation that they're going to wait and hold their fire against former President Trump until they can knock each other out of this race. For Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, if he doesn't have a strong showing here in Iowa, his campaign, he says, is built for the long haul. But realistically, the donors are going to dry up. The momentum is certainly going to slow to a halt here if he doesn't come in second, and a strong second at that, given all of the resources that he's put in here. But for Nikki Haley, she also has a problem because she's got momentum in New Hampshire. Absolutely, she's within striking distance. But South Carolina, Chris, that is Trump country. I traveled all across that state a couple of months ago. It is not the same state that it was when she was governor there. It's redder, it's more conservative, and it is much, much more in favor of Donald Trump than it was just a little while ago. And if Ron DeSantis does drop out of this race, our math has shown this in the polling, the majority of his ballot share does go to Donald Trump. So DeSantis dropping out doesn't necessarily help Haley as much as perhaps she would like it to, Chris.
The dominance of Trump. Dasha Burns, thank you so much. You know, the longest week in politics might just be those 8 days between Iowa and the New Hampshire primary. NBC Shaquille Brewster reports from Manchester for us. I mean, let's face it, a major chunk of the political world is about to move overnight to the Granite State. I've watched those planes take off, those buses load up. What's waiting for them where you are?
Well, Chris, you're looking at a fundamentally different electorate here in New Hampshire. You're talking about a group of voters that's less conservative than what you see in Iowa, less evangelical, and you have a bigger share of independent voters that will be participating in this primary. And because of that, you're seeing a fundamentally different dynamic here in New Hampshire. You look at the polling, you heard Dasha explain it there. Nikki Haley is within striking distance. Yes, Donald Trump is still ahead, but you have some polls showing her within 10 percentage points of the former president. The former president already planning a slew of events in New Hampshire. He'll be here almost every day between now or between tomorrow and the actual primary. And I've been talking to voters about how they're viewing this, how they're looking at what's happening in Iowa and influencing their decision and what they plan to do next week. And listen to some of those conversations.
You got to take the good with the bad, and it's almost like you got to kind of flip a coin at this point.
I saw it in your face. It seems like you're struggling with this decision.
Yes, I think it is a make or break election for the country.
The Iowa caucuses will influence how you look at these candidates once they get here.
I think so, yeah.
It means nothing to me.
Iowa means nothing.
No, I'm an independent, but I'm going to vote for Nikki Haley to try to slow Trump's momentum.
You see New Hampshire voters almost looking at this as a way, some of them, as a way to slow down Trump's momentum. One other factor here, those polls that I mentioned that show Nikki Haley within striking distance, most of those were done before former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie left the race. He was a candidate who was polling in the third place, had a consistent about 11-12% in those same polls. There's an open question as to where his voters go. I'll tell you, I talked to some, I checked in with some voters who I met at his campaign suspension from last week, and they, at that time, those voters said they didn't know what they would be doing. The majority of the people that I talked to then are now saying they're looking at Nikki Haley, but it depends on what happens tonight in Iowa, as that Iowa result will have an impact on how strong New Hampshire voters see these candidates.
Shaquille Brewster, fascinating stuff. Thank you. Well, there is an issue dominating not only the Iowa caucuses, but the 2024 race in general, and that is immigration. A heated battle is now playing out between the state of Texas and the Biden administration following the drowning deaths of 3 migrants. NBC's Morgan Chesky is following that story for us from Eagle Pass. Morgan, exactly what happened there?
Yeah, Chris, good afternoon. Big story, 2 different events being described, one from the Biden administration's point of view, another from the state of Texas. Late Friday evening, the Department of Homeland Security reporting that officials there near Eagle Pass received a call from Mexican authorities reporting that a woman and 2 children were drowning in the Rio Grande. They claimed that by the time they arrived to this area known as Shelby Park, it was blocked off by state officials, members of the National Guard there, and that they were unable to reach the migrants in the water. On the state side, however, Chris, they are claiming that by the time Border Patrol agents arrived, those migrants had already drowned and were in the process of being recovered by Mexican authorities. Today, a cease and desist letter coming from the Justice Department to the state of Texas, basically asking them to stop blocking Border Patrol agents or any federal official, for that matter, from being able to access specifically this area along the U.S.-Mexico border so that they can do their job, giving them just a couple days to respond to this before receiving more legal action. Of course, you look at this tragedy, Chris, just the latest chapter in a saga between the state of Texas and the Biden administration. We do know that Governor Greg Abbott defended the decision for the state to essentially protect its borders, saying that it's up to them because he can no longer rely on the Biden administration. The president asked a question as he was leaving the White House today. What is his message to Governor Abbott? He declined to say anything explicitly, but I believe that this cease and desist letter essentially sums that up. Meanwhile, we do know that numbers have dropped off when it comes to border crossings, Chris, but important to note that that is typical for this time of year. Chris.
Morgan Chesky, thank you. Up next, the coldest caucuses ever. Iowa voters braving snow and temperatures hitting minus 10 degrees in some places. The forecast and just how hard the weather may make it to physically get to a caucus. When we're back in 60 seconds.
You know, my Jeep did not start this morning given the cold temperatures, so I had to Uber into the office. A lot of Iowans are going through that.
Right now in Iowa, it is so cold that bone-chilling doesn't even begin to describe it. In West Liberty, Iowa, you can see cars and trucks just left stranded on the side of the road, completely buried in snow or something close to it. In Des Moines, it feels like 21 below zero with the wind chill. For context, that's just 5 degrees warmer than the South Pole right now. So freezing that, look at this guy, throws water into the air and it instantly turns to snow. All this as the 2024 Republican campaigns make one final push to win over caucus goers before they gather less than 6 hours from now. MSNBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has the latest forecast for us. Bill, what does it look like for tonight's caucus and all across the country?
Iowans are tough. I mean, they say this is no big deal. I mean, I think most of us would not be thrilled to be out in weather like this. You know, this cold blast has been with us for 3 days. So that's the good thing. If people are kind of gotten used to it over the last couple days, the weekend was frigid too. So this is, I plotted every single temperature gauge in the state of Iowa here, just to show you the range that we have. And these are the actual temperatures. The only location that is 0 or above is in the very southwest corner of the state. Shenandoah is the warmest spot in the state at 1 degree. And then when we factor in the winds blowing, and this is how it feels on your skin, it's much worse. Many areas are in the negative 20 range. A few spots are close to negative 36 we see there. And it's kind of widespread. Even, you know, Davenport's negative 26. So you get the idea. Everyone that's heading out, it's going to be windy. It's not snowing at least. You know, obviously there's ice everywhere still from the snowstorm that we had a couple days ago. But this is the forecast as we go throughout this evening. You know, frigid winds, chance of, you know, frostbite if you get caught out in it. But if you're prepared for it and you have your skin covered up and you run to your car, heat it up, and, you know, get back in later, everything should be just fine. Other areas of the country, Chris, haven't been as lucky either. This has been a significant day for snow in the south. I mean, we don't see this that often. Nashville, 5 inches. Memphis, 4 inches. Little Rock, 4 inches. The kids are out playing around. The dogs are running in the backyards. They're having a great time. Even Alabama's had 2 inches. And this later tonight will slide to the east coast and come up into the northeast. And areas that we've been talking about with the snow drought, how it's been 2 years almost, D.C., Baltimore, Philly, and New York, that snow is on the way. It's still snowing pretty hard right now in areas of northern Mississippi, Alabama, through Tennessee. Now Virginia, it's starting to snow. Tonight in the D.C. area, it breaks out. And tomorrow morning, Chris, when you wake up in New York, there should be about 1 to 3 inches of snow out there. Not a big ordeal, but because everyone's going back to school and also back to work, the morning commute could be a little dicey in the Northeast.
I walk, so I'll just make sure that I have my snow boots on. Bill Cairns, thank you so much. It is so cold in Iowa. I'm cold just watching people. I want to bring in Dave Kochel, an Iowa GOP strategist who has worked on 6 presidential campaigns, including Mitt Romney's and Jeb Bush's. Good to see you, David. And I want to play for you what some voters told our correspondents about the weather there.
How cold would it have to be for you to not go caucus on Monday night?
An astronomical, probably 80 below.
How concerned are you that the weather might be a factor tomorrow night?
Not concerned at all after being here in Iowa for the last 20-some years. The blizzard slows us down, but the cold weather won't stop us at all.
Brave souls, but turnout has never been huge in Iowa. Look, it isn't generally for primaries in most states. How much do you think the cold will affect turnout and the results tonight? How much of a question mark is it right now?
It's a real question mark. I mean, it is really cold here. We're used to temperatures 0, 10 degrees, 20 degrees. We all, have to get our kids to school and get in our cars and go to work. People are used to that. Minus 30, minus 40 wind chill, that's a different thing. Now you're talking about your car doesn't turn over, your battery might die. If you're in a ditch anywhere, nobody's coming by because the roads are empty today and will be probably tonight. So we're in a different territory. I think it'll affect turnout a lot. In 2016, we had 187,000 Republicans participate. I've been thinking maybe 150,000 for this caucus. I doubt we get there. We'll see a lower turnout, and that can often bring with it a surprise.
All right. Well, I mean, obviously, as a journalist, we're always looking for surprises. It makes for good copy. But you are the expert in Iowa on the expectations game. Beyond just a first-place finish, do you think that there's a margin of victory Donald Trump has to have before people start to think, oh, maybe he is a little vulnerable?
I don't know that it's a margin of victory. I think there's two campaigns. There's Trump versus expectations for himself based on his polling, and then you've got Haley and DeSantis fighting it out for a second. If Trump, whose Real Clear Politics average right now is 51%, if he falls short of 50%, what that means is over half of Iowans said no. They want to go somewhere else. So that's his expectation, I think. And then you've got the race for second place, Haley and DeSantis. Who's got the momentum? Who's got the machinery? Haley appears to have the momentum. DeSantis has invested a lot of money in his organization. He's hoping that's going to come through for him. And I think that's going to be the bigger story tonight, because ultimately it's going to have to be Trump versus one other candidate if there's any chance to block him from the nomination. It's got to get down to a one-on-one race.
We've talked about how in 2008, Mike Huckabee went on to win the Iowa caucuses thanks to what's now known as the Pizza Ranch strategy. He stopped at those locations in evangelical-rich counties. Candidates have been trying to replicate that strategy ever since, really, including Vivek Ramaswamy, who's been, I don't know, he probably has as many events as almost everybody else put together. Considering that this strategy has delivered results for little-known candidates, when you talk about a surprise, what are the chances Vivek Ramaswamy delivers one?
I'm not a believer in the Vivek Ramaswamy theory here. I think if you like Vivek Ramaswamy and you're going to his events, you're voting for Trump. They have the same message, so that's where I think we're going. As for the Pizza Ranch strategy, what it requires then is for evangelicals to move as a block, to all go together to one candidate, like they did for Huckabee, for Santorum, and even largely to Ted Cruz. Now, evangelical leaders have endorsed Ron DeSantis, but Trump has a significant amount of support among evangelicals as well. So what we're going to see with Christian voters is they're really split for the first time since 2000. So I don't know that anybody can actually capitalize on that kind of strategy. But that's what we're going to watch for tonight. Are they the diehards? Are they going to come out in a big block? And who do they vote for?
David Kochel, in the warmth of the indoors in Iowa, it's great to see you and have your knowledge of the state. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Still ahead, an emotional speech from the Fulton County DA investigating Donald Trump. The accusations she answered in the middle of a church service. The Georgia DA investigating Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants for election interference is fighting back against allegations of misconduct that accuse her and accuses her critics of racism. Speaking at a church on Sunday, Fulton County DA Fani Willis became emotional while talking about what she has endured since she took up the case against Trump.
God, you did not tell me that people would call me the N-word more than they call me Fani. You did not tell me as a woman of color, it would not matter what I did. My motive, my talent, my ability, and my character would be constantly attacked. God, you did not tell me my home would be swept multiple times for bombs. Or that most days and nights that I would spend them in isolation because that was the safest place to be. Dear God, I do not want to be like those that attack me. I never want to be a Marjorie Taylor Greene who has never met me but has allowed her spirit to be filled with hate. How does this woman, who has the honor of being a leader in my state, how is it that she has not reached out to me?
Joining us now, Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. Look, I think her story, unfortunately, has been repeated too many times by people who have been involved in one way or another in the sphere of Donald Trump. This was also her first public speaking appearance since one of Trump's co-defendants alleged in a court filing that she had an improper romantic relationship with the special prosecutor she hired. That filing accuses them of financially benefiting from the relationship. Here's some of what she said about that.
God, wasn't it them that attacked this lawyer of impeccable credentials? The black man I chose has been a judge more than 10 years, run a private practice more than 20, represented businesses in civil litigation. I ain't done, y'all. Served as a prosecutor, a criminal defense lawyer, special assistant attorney general, won Chief Justice Robert Benham Award from the State Bar of Georgia. You know, they ain't just giving this to black men. How come God, the same black man I hired.
So she's making a defense of the qualifications of the special prosecutor, but she did not confirm or deny allegations. There are a couple, but more specifically that they profited from his appointment, funded by taxpayers, which is what the critics are saying. Are there still legitimate questions she should answer, Glenn?
You know, I think time will tell, and I'm sure there will be some great investigative reporting by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and other publications. But, Chris, for a moment, let's just assume they had a previous personal relationship, because I think that helps frame our discussion. It raises two questions. Will that have any impact on the legal proceedings in the enormous co-defendant case that's being prosecuted in Georgia? The answer is almost certainly no. It will have no impact on the legal proceedings. Will it have an impact in the court of public opinion? It certainly could, and we can talk about how that is, but let's talk about the legal issue presented. You know, there are times when folks who are involved in a case might have prior or even current personal relationships, so there's kind of that intertwining of the personal and the professional. Where it becomes a significant legal issue is where, for example, a judge might have had a prior personal relationship with an attorney on the prosecution team, an attorney on the defense team, with a witness who might be called by either side as part of the litigation, because that can raise the specter of a potential conflict, and that's when judges typically are required to recuse themselves from the case. Or it could be that folks on the prosecution team maybe had a prior relationship with somebody on the defense team. That also can raise the specter of a conflict of interest that can become a legal issue. Fani Willis has assembled the team, a pretty big, sizable team that she believes is appropriate to, tackle this prosecution, the 19 co-defendant conspiracy case. But as is being reported, she hired multiple special counsel. They're all reportedly being paid the same. This gentleman that she hired, Nathan Wade, has prior experience as a defense attorney, as I believe a municipal court judge. He obviously brings a certain skill set to the trial team, the prosecution team. And if we, hypothetically, they had a prior relationship, it really will not impact the legal proceedings because they're all kind of on the same team. There's no conflict. Now, in the court of public opinion, we can see Donald Trump potentially trying to exploit this, maybe even misrepresenting the nature of it. Why? Because his goal is always to try the case in the court of public opinion and undermine the public's confidence, not only in the institutions, but in the outcome in the event he ends up being held accountable and convicted at trial.
Well, he's already done it as recently as this weekend. He talked about it very critically. I don't want to put words in your mouth. So if you think this case is not strong, is it less about getting the charges dismissed, but more, when you talk about public opinion, sowing seeds of doubt or controversy in the minds of potential jurors?
It absolutely is, and that's why jury selection in this case, Chris, is going to be so important. And I am quite sure Judge McAfee will conduct a very sort of searing and probing inquiry of each and every potential juror to see what they may have heard about the case, whether they have formed any opinions about the guilt or innocence of the defendants, and whether they can try the case based only on the evidence they hear in court and nothing else they may have learned. And I'm confident they're going to be able to impanel a fair and impartial jury to hear this case. And I think this story attacking Fani Willis for having a personal relationship potentially with one of the team members is going to sort of melt away and not become legally significant.
Glenn Kirshner, always good to see you. Thanks. And we have some heartbreaking news to share. The principal, wounded in an Iowa school shooting earlier this month, has died after 10 days in the hospital. Principal Dan Marburger was among the 3 staff members and 4 students who were injured when a 17-year-old gunman opened fire at Perry High School. His daughter wrote then on Facebook, "As I heard of a gunman, I instantly had a feeling my dad would be a victim, as he would put himself in harm's way for the benefit of the kids and staff. That he tried to talk the gunman down and distract him long enough for students to flee the cafeteria's breakfast program." A 6th grader was killed before the gunman turned the gun on himself. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds ordered all flags to be lowered to half staff until Marburger's funeral in honor of him and his heroism. With all the attention today on the GOP and Iowa, Democrats announced some big updates for Biden's re-election push. We've got that next. While the Republican presidential race is focused on Iowa, the Biden campaign is about to throw a little victory party of its own. Less than an hour from now, they will officially announce some historic fundraising numbers as the general election starts to take shape tonight. NBC's Mike Memoli is in South Carolina traveling with Vice President Harris. Also with us, Democratic strategist and former senior aide on the Biden-Harris campaign, Adrian Elrod. Great to have both of you. Mike, tell us more about these fundraising numbers.
Well, Chris, I've been hearing from some sources for a few weeks now that the Biden campaign felt like they were going to beat their own expectations as far as how much money they raised at the end of 2023. And what better day to make it official than this day when Republicans are really just starting their nomination process. So the headline numbers, $97 million raised in the final 3 months of 2023. That's an improvement on $71 million, $72 million that they raised in the 2 previous fundraising quarters. Even bigger, $117 million. That's how much the Biden campaign has in the bank to start the year 2024. To put that in perspective, the campaign says, look, the Republicans in Iowa have spent $100 million combined on the airwaves just trying to get out the caucus votes for tonight. And so that's a significant advantage for the incumbent as we start this year. But it's really, if you look under the hood at some of the numbers that they're also talking about, that the Biden sees real strength, especially as it relates to grassroots support. The average donation, just about $41. 97% of the donors gave less than $200. That means that they can keep going back to these donors over and over again through the course of this year. And, Chris, we have to also mention another factor that boosted the Biden campaign fundraising in this last quarter. It was the end of that Hollywood writer's strike. We know that Southern California is an ATM machine for Democratic politicians. And so the Biden campaign was able to finally get back to Southern California, do some fundraisers there. That also boosted this number.
Okay, Adrian, maybe a little bit of counter-programming by the team, by the Biden team, given that this is a Republican caucus day. I want to play something, though, that one of the co-chairs of the Biden campaign, Hollywood exec Jeffrey Katzenberg, said this morning on Morning Joe, kind of previewing this press conference that's coming up.
Over 1 million people have contributed to Joe Biden's campaign. So that is a level of enthusiasm and commitment and grassroots support, which was essential in his 2020 campaign, which I just don't think is being reflected in sort of the Beltway gossip.
Is this, do you think, Adrian, realistically going to quiet some of the concerns among Democrats about Biden's reelection fight? Or is it just a matter of they're worried Donald Trump doesn't really need a lot of money? He gets attention no matter what he does. He gets more free advertising than anybody in the history of campaigns.
Yeah, I think it's sort of twofold, Chris, but certainly I hope this calms down some of the bedwetters. I mean, we do that very, very well in the Democratic Party. You know, we're constantly stressed, we're constantly nervous, but you cannot underestimate how significant these numbers are for the Biden campaign. No candidate in Democratic history has had this much cash on hand at this stage of the campaign. As Jeffrey Katzenberg mentioned, that one of the chairs of the campaign, we do have a significant number of grassroots donors. Over 1 million donors have donated. These are huge statistics. This is more than, you know, President Obama raised, more than Secretary Clinton when she ran raised, you know, at this time. And the other important factor I think to consider is Q4 of the off year, which is the last quarter of the year before the presidential cycle, is usually the hardest quarter to raise money. The fact that the Biden campaign raised nearly $100 million, they have $117 million cash on hand. A lot of this money is coming from the grassroots. It is really hard to really justify how significant these numbers are at this stage of the game. And again, to all my Democratic friends out there and all of those who are going to support the Biden-Harris campaign, calm down, take a deep breath, channel your energy to volunteering instead of going on Twitter and you know, causing consternation. This is a really good place to be in, and I think the Biden campaign is only going to build on these numbers.
We heard a lot of consternation, or read a lot of consternation. There was a big newspaper article, I'm sure you saw it, Adrian, about how they're worried that some of the people who should maybe be at headquarters are actually at the White House, and that people are spread too thin. Anyway, as part of the plan to build infrastructure, the campaign announced a couple of big additions to their staff. John Kerry, leaving as a kind of environmental guru, is going over to the campaign. A former Jon Stewart producer is going to be doing a lot of messaging. How much do you think those kinds of moves can help post Iowa as we start to really get a sense of where this campaign is going?
Yeah, look, it's pretty significant. Obviously, Mitch Landrieu, who ran the infrastructure implementation, is also leaving the White House. He's going to be a top campaign surrogate. John Kerry was the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party in 2004. He's going to be going over as the top surrogate. But I think some of this is so silly about who's in the West Wing versus who is on the campaign. Jen O'Malley Dillon, who ran the Biden campaign in 2020 for the general election, is in the West Wing, is one of the top advisors. Anita Dunn, one of the top strategists, longtime strategists in our party, is in the White House. And then you've got Julie Rodriguez and Rufus Gifford and so many incredible people on the campaign. We have the top brain trust in the Democratic Party between the DNC, the White House, and the campaign. Everyone should just, again, sit back and be happy about all the talent that we have that are all working together to ensure that Biden-Harris gets reelected.
Exuding calm, Adrian Elrod. Thank you, Mike Memoli. Always good to have you on, my friend. And coming up, new fears about what Trump potentially returning to the White House could mean for the U.S. military. The biggest concerns we're hearing inside the Pentagon. But first, some harrowing images out of southwestern Iceland after the volcano there erupted for the second time in less than a month. Lava spewing into the town of Grindavik, just 30 miles from the capital. The volcano's eruption razed an entire settlement of homes, but fortunately they had evacuated everyone, and no injuries have been reported. We have new NBC News reporting now about the growing fears that Donald Trump, if he wins back the presidency, could use the military in dictatorial ways. Lawmakers and public interest groups have expressed concern that Trump will install loyalists at the Pentagon and then try to use the armed forces to combat protests, or even use them if the midterm elections, say, didn't go his way. NBC's Courtney Kuby is reporting on this story for us. Courtney, what are you hearing? What are the biggest questions surrounding how Trump could use the military? And is anything being done to get ahead of it?
So this is really based on things that now that President Trump is no longer in office, a number of senior officials who served under him have written books and laying out certain scenarios that occurred that maybe the public didn't know about at the time, and now starting to raise some alarm bells about how a second-term President Trump could try to do things in a similar vein. So one example would be using the military to quell protesters in the streets, according to a book by a number of officials, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper. We also had a book from former National Security Advisor John Bolton talking about the sorts of things that President Trump talked about in high-level Oval Office meetings, using the military for ways that could be seen as overstepping his bounds. Now, the concern, according to a number of officials who we spoke to over the course of reporting this out for weeks, frankly, Chris, was that while in the first term there were people around President Trump who would push back on some of these ideas, that a second Trump term, we could see more loyalists supporting him and serving in his administration who may not push back as forcefully. And some of the ideas, for instance, in his first term, talking about potentially launching missiles into Mexico. Secretary Esper, former Secretary Esper, said that he pushed back on that, calling it an act of war. He wrote about that in his book. But the concern, again, Chris, is that in a next Trump administration, there may not necessarily be people in place who would push back as forcefully on some of these ideas. And this all goes to a bigger problem that, candidly, is something I've been hearing about here at the Pentagon for years now, and that is the growing concerns surrounding the politicization of the military. We've heard about it from former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, going back all the way to when we had Secretary of Defense Robert Gates here. The concern was that the military is increasingly being seen as a potentially a unit that could be politicized by presidents. And the officials who we spoke with, they really pointed that out here. Another real concern with a second President Trump term would be some of the things that, again, he threatened, like pulling the U.S. out of NATO. And we've seen some lawmakers who have taken action to try to prevent that, even before this election, frankly, kicks off. We don't even have a Republican nominee yet, but lawmakers on Capitol Hill trying to cut off some of the potential things that a next President Trump could even try to bring to bear. Again, like pulling the U.S. out of NATO. That would be much more difficult because of actions on Capitol Hill, Chris.
Courtney Cubie with some very sobering reporting. Thank you for that. I want to bring in Republican Congressman Zach Nunn of Iowa, a member of the Four-Country Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of Iraq and Afghanistan combat veterans serving in Congress. I wonder, Congressman, if when you guys get together, and women I assume too, if you have conversations, how worried are folks like you? You spent almost, I think, 20 years in the Air Force. How many conversations are about concerns surrounding the politicization of the military in general?
Well, yeah, no, first and foremost, thanks so much, because I think this is really important. Look, every member, particularly of the freshman class who are military members, both Republicans and Democrats, we've worked together towards pragmatic solutions. I'm still a commander in the U.S. Air Force Reserves now. I've sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, as have so many of my brothers and sisters. And so I'm going to be very specific on this front. I don't think there's any merit to these claims. And candidly, I think these are based on people who want to sell books, stoke fears, get clicks on social media, or try and drive up ratings. The reality is the military is committed to the American people, to the Constitution that we have sworn an oath to defend, and to the countries like the United States that we have not only sworn our life to, but the countries that we've served in overseas. So Democrat, Republican, the military is a reflection of the entire country and not some, Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps that's going to be summoned up by anybody, Democrat or Republican. Our responsibilities to the people of the United States, that's why I'm proud to continue to serve. And now we're on a new deployment mission, if you will, to Washington, D.C. to try and bring that kind of common sense back to what's happening in Washington.
I know, Congressman, you haven't endorsed anyone in this race, but we are living in a very uncertain world right now. Israel-Hamas war in Ukraine, Chinese aggression, that's just starters, right? As a combat veteran, is there a Republican or Republicans who are running right now for president who you believe is ready to deal with this worldwide instability on day one?
Yeah, so, being in Iowa, I get to see firsthand these candidates come to the state and have conversations with farmers, with families, with fellow colleagues, and really make their pitch on what they see as the great national security risks. And I can tell you unequivocally, it's the risk to the country itself. It's our southern border, the
nearly 12 million illegal gotaways just in the last 3 years that have come to the country, including those that have ties to Iran, ones that have ties to Chinese elements that want to set up sleeper cells here in the United States, and certainly a Russia that is bellicose. We need to be looking at what Moscow, Tehran, Pyongyang, and what Beijing are doing. I think, the folks that we've talked to, the 3 tickets out of Iowa, any one of those candidates can step in day one to the White House and have a proven history of actually leading affirmatively to protect this country, both on the southern border, but also in actions overseas. In my combat operations, both in Afghanistan, off the coast of Russia, I've seen firsthand that if you don't stand up to a totalitarian regime, they take that push and they take one step further. We need a White House that, candidly, in the last 3 years has allowed Russia to continue to besiege the Ukraine, that we have seen what's happened with Hamas gone largely unanswered by the United States when we still have U.S. citizens who are being held hostage. We need to be able to work pragmatically on this, that we're using all instruments of national power, not just the military, including our economic, our information, as well as our diplomatic, in combination with our military, to be able to push back on totalitarian and autocrats around the world. I feel very firmly that the folks that I've talked to in Iowa who want to be the next commander-in-chief could meet that stepping into the office on day one.
We have less than a minute left, but I have to ask you to take off your military hat and put on your political one. We had a long time a political analyst in Iowa saying he thinks this weather is so extremely cold, it could indeed depress turnout. What are you watching for tonight in the 30 seconds we have left?
Yeah, I'll just say, you know what? It is nearly 30 degrees below with the wind chill. I shoveled out of my driveway this morning. We've got dead car batteries. And guess what? That's pretty much a standard Monday in Iowa when it's January. So I think Iowans are committed to this. They're going to be turning out. They're excited about this. People are energized. We take our First of the Nation duties very enthusiastically, and I think we're going to see both independents, Republicans, maybe even some Democrats come out here and really be involved in shaping this first-line conversation on who's going to end up being the next commander-in-chief of the United States. It gets to start right here in Iowa, but it's the entire country's voice and where that happens. So we're proud to take our role in this. We're going to take it very seriously. I think you're going to see very high turnout tonight. We're excited for it.
And Congressman Zach Nunn, I hope your battery turns over when you go to leave tonight. Thank you for being on the program. Appreciate it. And that's going to do it for us this hour. Make sure to join us for Chris Jansing Reports every weekday, 1 to 3 Eastern, here on MSNBC. Our coverage continues with Katie Tur reports live from New Hampshire right after the break.
Good to be with you. I'm Katie Tur, coming to you today from, wait for it, Manchester, New Hampshire. So why New Hampshire on this Iowa caucus day? Well, because as Nikki Haley undiplomatically put it, New Hampshire is where the race starts to really matter. Iowa, as much as we love her, rarely picks a winner, while New Hampshire has repeatedly given a B12 shot to the underdog, Bill Clinton in '92, John McCain in '08. Now Nikki Haley wants in on that list, and voters in this notoriously independent state tell me they are just waiting for her to prove that she can do it. So can she? If you add Chris Christie's support to hers here in New Hampshire, the math is close. We have the narrow path she could follow out of the Granite State with the Atlantic's Mark Leibovich. But before she goes anywhere, she's got to make it through tonight's caucus, where it is 0 degrees and getting colder. Joining us now from Des Moines, Iowa, is NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale, staff writer at The Atlantic, and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich. And here on set with me is NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster. Ali, I'm so happy to see you inside on this very, very cold day. Tell me what Nikki Haley is doing in the last moments before this caucus tonight.
She's making the rounds still, Katie, on the campaign trail circuit, specifically in the area that sort of makes a donut around Des Moines. And that's because her focus here in Iowa is really going to be to gin up turnout in those suburban areas outside of the population centers that you and I spent so much time in 2016, places like Iowa City and Davenport and certainly Des Moines. If you look back to 2016 when we were all out here, the counties that Marco Rubio had done pretty well in,
those are the places that Nikki Haley is likely to be focusing her energy and where her campaign, according to my conversations with them, is going to be focusing when results start coming in tonight. At the same time, though, she's urging her voters this morning, please get out and vote. Don't let me surging into second place make you rest on your laurels somehow. Watch.
I mean, he's only played in Iowa. He's invisible in New Hampshire. He's invisible in South Carolina. He's 4th and 5th place in both of those. I mean, I welcome him to South Carolina, but we're headed to New Hampshire. That's the next state to vote. Somebody might want to tell him that.
And of course, long day, Katie, a lot of conversations with Nikki Haley. That one, of course, was me talking with the former South Carolina governor about Ron DeSantis, because for her, the focus in this state is getting in second, which is typically not the kind of spin that we're used to receiving from campaigns. Usually around this time, it would be every different candidate trying to say why they're going to win in Iowa. For Haley, they're not making that argument, but what they are trying to do is get Ron DeSantis out of the way here in Iowa so that they can roll into New Hampshire feeling like this is the mano-a-mano race that they have been looking towards the entire time she has been in this race. Haley really wants it to look like it's Haley versus Trump on the ground in New Hampshire. And quite frankly, when she says that Ron DeSantis is, in her words, invisible in New Hampshire and South Carolina, she's trying to reference the fact that even though he says he's built for the long haul, she doesn't see it, and she'd like it to be a much smaller field. That's where her campaign thinks she'll thrive.
Allie, what does she say about the favorability rating? The Des Moines Register poll has her in second place, but her favorability is a lot lower than Ron DeSantis. And in a caucus, second place, second choice is what matters. And if more people go to Ron DeSantis as their second choice, she's not going to come in second. So how does she ensure that she has the enthusiasm there? What's her ground game operation like in Iowa?
Well, so the enthusiasm metric is one that we've certainly been paying attention to, because in the NBC News Des Moines Register poll, as you know, Katie, there is seemingly some kind of enthusiasm gap on the Haley part compared to the rest of her competitors. You see it there on the screen. Only roughly 4 in 10 are extremely or very enthusiastic about actually getting out to caucus for her. Temperatures like this, I know that y'all are cold there in New Hampshire, but it is balmy compared to what we're experiencing here in Des Moines and in other places in Iowa. People are really going to need to feel that enthusiasm if they're going to get out and vote. That's one piece of the equation, but then the ground game piece is another. Certainly, Haley's campaign has nothing on the ground game that someone like Ron DeSantis has invested in a state like Iowa, but they do have the backup of the Americans for Prosperity, that Koch group that endorsed her several months ago. That's a big organization that allows a lot of footprints on the ground here in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. That is really just a bolster, and in my conversations with Haley, she's brushing off any concerns about enthusiasm, but certainly her campaign has been clear with me that help from AFP is a big help when you consider a state like Iowa, where she didn't put all of her resources, but now they're expecting a big performance anyway.
Okay, so obviously we're watching Iowa as reporters, but I noticed that you told me this yesterday or on Saturday night that people here are watching Iowa to see how they're going to vote on primary night next week. And so when I was talking to voters today, I ended up hearing the same thing. I want to play one of the gentlemen I spoke with earlier who said he's not really a politics guy, doesn't really want to participate, but he is interested in Nikki Haley. There's just one thing. Listen. It's coming.
If I had to choose, probably Nikki Haley.
Really? Why?
Just, I think it's time that we had a woman in office, and I like her beliefs and what she's standing for. I think the country needs change. I think it's time. I've never really been political, but I think it's time for change.
So no Trump?
No Trump.
We've got some bugs in the system. We're working them out. Tell me what you're hearing from voters, because this idea that she has to show that she can do it in Iowa.
Right.
What is a win for her? What is a good second place number?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. And look, when you talk to voters here in New Hampshire, you know New Hampshire voters, they are fiercely independent, if not by party, but at least by spirit. So they don't want to really lean into the idea that they're watching other states too closely and that will influence what they do here. But they acknowledge that what happens in Iowa will influence and impact how they view these candidates. If Nikki Haley comes out with a strong second place, or even honestly a second place finish in a state where you heard Allie there mentioning she didn't invest all her resources into, that could make her look like the stronger contender once she gets to this state of New Hampshire. And talking to voters, there's a lot that they're watching. I wanted to actually play some sound from some folks in those conversations that I've been having today.
I'm going to vote for Nikki Haley to try to slow Trump's momentum.
That's the main reason you're supporting Nikki Haley?
Yes, I wouldn't vote for her in the general. If she were to win over Trump, which is probably not that likely, I would support Joe Biden over her. But I think we need to slow this person down.
Are you leaning anyway right now, based on the television ads, based on what you've heard, just the little that you've heard up to this point?
I'm undecided.
You're fully undecided?
Absolutely. I am going to write in Joe Biden.
You're writing in Joe Biden? Mm-hmm. How did you know that was even an option to write him in?
I was following the news about the DNC's positioning on changing the first in the nation primary. And then the ad campaign that he's been pushing has been informative also.
You've seen those ads?
Yes.
You voted for Trump twice. Why are you considering another candidate this time around?
Just kind of looking at it with fresh eyes compared to the issues that we had in 2016 or 2020. It's a completely different country right now, I feel, right? So I think that with new issues, maybe somebody might bring something fresh to the table.
And I'm glad we included that sound from the Biden voter, because that is another storyline here in New Hampshire, where in Iowa, it's all about the Republicans. That's where all the action is taking place. Here, Biden and the DNC, they're not officially part of this primary process, but you have Democrats here saying, hey, I'm still willing to write him in, or I'm still perhaps even meddling in the Republican primary process as a way to be involved in this.
Democrats are really angry about them getting skipped in this primary season, and it's starting in South Carolina. Don't discount that anger that Democrats are feeling towards President Biden right now. Mark, I want to talk about Nikki Haley's strategy here. One of the lines we keep hearing her say is that chaos follows Donald Trump. And to some ears, that can sound like her not directly attacking him, not really going after him. But I was talking to our embed here in New Hampshire, who's been living here for now 6 months, and she said that is the line that she hears over and over again from New Hampshire voters about why they're considering Nikki Haley, both from voters who are looking for somebody new because they don't like Donald Trump any longer, and from voters who do like Donald Trump but have to concede that, yes, chaos does follow him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that it's clearly something she said repeatedly. I mean, in the course of reporting this story, I probably heard it about, several times a day. The full quote is actually rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him, which sort of adds a different layer of a new sort of level of passiveness to the quote. I mean, I get it. People think, chaos, but it's not the chaos. And the way Haley talks about this is she doesn't talk about Trump causing the chaos. I mean, it's just as if the chaos kind of followed him like passively. I mean, it's like chaos basically is a catch-all for January 6th for whatever is, embedded in these 91 counts of criminal misconduct and what have you. So it's much more than that. And I think that goes to a kind of ceiling in Nikki Haley's support, which is that she has not really gone after Trump in a real way. And if she wants to win, and if she does well in Iowa and New Hampshire and actually has a straight shot at him in some of the later states, especially if DeSantis gets out, she's going to actually have to more frontally attack Donald Trump and actually run to win. At this point, she's running a race that's more cautious, certainly doesn't look like it's a campaign for first place, looks more like a campaign for either running mate or 2028 or something to the effect that, maybe it's not going to happen this time. So I do think that is emblematic of the kind of half-hearted effort she will put forth or has put forth to this point in attacking Donald Trump.
So if she does start to win, though, say she gets a solid second place tonight and potentially pulls off a win here, if you add Chris Christie's support to hers, it about totals Donald Trump's support. That's assuming that all Christie voters go to her. We'll see about that. I was listening to you on the Atlantic podcast the other day, and you talked about Nikki Haley's path forward out of New Hampshire and through the rest of the primaries as not really a path, but a deer trail. Can you explain that?
Yeah, actually, I was questioning the use of deer trail. It was someone else who used the expression, but I would say this. I mean, I think the conventional wisdom is Nikki Haley has a very small shot at doing this, although I also think it is a legitimate shot, and I think it might be a little bigger than what everyone says, because look, especially if DeSantis really underperforms tonight and decides to drop out even before New Hampshire. I mean, he seems to be signaling that South Carolina is his next point of emphasis, but I don't see him really competing there in a serious way, especially if he does badly tonight and then gets clobbered in New Hampshire. But look, I think she has a shot, but I think at some point she needs to amp this up a little bit, and she's not there yet. And maybe she's calculated it that will begin after tonight. Maybe it'll begin after New Hampshire when you go down to South Carolina if she performs well in New Hampshire. So look, it's a lot of strategy. I don't pretend to know what's going on inside the campaign strategy-wise, but I think that she does have a shot, and I think that if she plays this right, it could be a lot more interesting than we might think in a couple weeks.
Does DeSantis stay in the race if he doesn't win in Iowa, if he doesn't come in second in Iowa?
I think it depends on how bad the third place is. I mean, he seems to, obviously he says he's not. I don't think you can take what a candidate says on election day about their future plans, with much more than a grain of salt. But look, I don't know how he doesn't do anything except play either a spoiler or just isn't wasting his time and money if he does really badly tonight, since he's staked the whole thing on Iowa for a number of months now. And, it's a little bit, you become a little dubious when at the last minute you say, okay, I can't finish third if it's a strong third and so forth. You're just sort of parsing it. So I don't think he should stay in. I mean, who knows what he will actually do.
For months, he's been saying that he's going to win Iowa. The past couple days, he's calling himself now the underdog, that he's going to do well in Iowa. So the change in the rhetoric there certainly tells you something. Mark Leibovich, Ali Vitale, Shaq Brewster, thank you guys very much. And coming up, what New Hampshire voters say they'll do to keep Donald Trump from getting the nomination. And if Nikki Haley makes a real go at it, what happens to the Republican Party? We are back in 60 seconds.
Daniel, how are you?
Nice to meet you, Daniel.
Thanks.
Tell me how you're feeling. What are you thinking?
I'm all over the place. I really don't know what to do.
Well,
I'm talking with my friends and stuff. I'm like, what are you guys doing? No one really has a solid answer.
What's the conversation like?
What do you do? No one's really coming out front. No one's really, who's paying attention to us? Things like that.
Are you going to watch the caucus tonight to see?
I am. I'm very interested in the caucus.
What are you interested in?
I want to see how it actually starts to unfold with all this going on over there. How people react to all the candidates talking, then they make their vote. I want to really see how that goes and who really is going to be the front runner tomorrow morning.
So
I got to get back to
is that going to change the way you vote on Tuesday?
It's possible. It's very, very possible.
Are you considering somebody other than Donald Trump?
I am.
Who?
I'm not telling you.
You're not. But you're going to watch tonight.
Yeah, I am.
To find out. Thank you.
Who are you with?
MSNBC.
Thank you so much.
It's great to talk to you. I love that you're going to vote on Tuesday. Participate.
You got to.
You have to.
You got to. Where are you
I
from?
agree.
Connecticut?
I'm from Brooklyn. He was asking me if I was going to vote next Tuesday. I said, I can't. I'm from Brooklyn. New Hampshire voters can be notoriously last minute in the live free or die state. Being undeclared is a point of pride. While there are a lot of undecided Daniels out there, like we saw. There are a lot of other Republican and would-be Republican voters who say to them, one thing is clear: no more Trump. Listen to my conversation with Thalia, Marie, and Hella, 3 women who tell me they are registering Republican for the primary in the hope that it will let them cast a new ballot in November.
Desperate times right now, so it's very critical. This election cycle is really important.
Why do you think it's so critical?
Because I really believe that democracy is on the line this time around. And we need to make sure that democracy prevails.
I think Republicans need to make a choice between if they want the White House or if they want Trump, if they're all about him. Because he's not a sure thing. Just like Biden's not a sure thing for the Democrats.
Yeah.
But I think Nikki Haley has more of a shot of beating Joe Biden because she's going to pull some of those moderates out. And I think she's really got a chance. So if they really want the White House, their best bet is to go with her.
Right.
Do you think Trump is dangerous for democracy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Absolutely.
He's pretty much said so himself. So.
And he's proven he doesn't understand how government works. He just wants to destroy it, break it down, and do his own thing.
And my concern with him is that that fascination with dictatorships.
If Nikki Haley gets a nomination, you guys are voting for Nikki Haley.
Oh, absolutely. I am.
Yeah?
I will.
Yes.
Yeah? Joining us now, former RNC member, executive committee member, former New Hampshire Republican Party chair, and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Jennifer Horn. Jen, I miss you. It has been too long.
Well, thank you. It has been way too long. I cannot believe that you're sitting outside right now. You've lost your mind.
I have a heated vest on. I've got a heater blowing at my feet. I'm doing very well. Let me ask you about what those women were just telling me, which is, listen, they're undeclared voters. They have voted for Democrats in the past. They don't love Joe Biden. They are desperate for somebody else to vote for, as long as that person is not Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. They want Nikki Haley. Is the Republican Party missing an opportunity here?
The Republican Party has missed 100 opportunities over the last 4 years, haven't they? Excuse me, but they are definitely missing an opportunity here. But here's the catch with all of this, especially in New Hampshire. We always talk about the idea that independent voters can come in on primary day and vote in whichever party they want. And people always talk about that as, gee, is something crazy going to happen? Is something big going to happen? And excuse me, Katie, I apologize. And it never does. There's no question that Donald Trump is just such a bomb thrower. He's just completely blown up the entire political process in our country, that if ever there was a time when people really would organize in a way that having these independents come in and vote with a different party would make a difference, this would be it. But with the competing influence of the Democrats trying to turn out folks to write in Joe Biden, I just don't know how that's going to work out. I don't see a huge influence on the number of voters that Nikki Haley ends up getting here.
Well, tell me what you're hearing in New Hampshire, because when I talk to people, I've been hearing Nikki Haley, Nikki Haley, Nikki Haley. I haven't been hearing Trump as much. I talked to, again, our embed who's been living here for 6 months, who says that she keeps hearing Nikki Haley organically at the grocery store on the street, not so much hearing Donald Trump organically, except for at the events that he's done. Do you see Nikki Haley as actually having a shot in this state now that Chris Christie is out, or are you thinking that it's all Trump all the way?
Yeah, I have to say, Nikki Haley's greatest strength, the best thing that has happened to her candidacy has been that AFP money. There's no question that when that came into the race, that pushed her in a way and was able to get her message out in a way that she was unable to do on her own.
This is the Koch brothers, by the way. We'll tell everybody.
Yes,
the AFP money is the Koch brothers.
Yes, the Americans for Prosperity, which is funded by the Koch brothers. And that what has really enabled her message to be spread to the degree that it has. That's why people are, using that line about chaos. That's why they're hearing it as often as they are. However, I don't think Nikki Haley beats Donald Trump in New Hampshire. If you look at 538, the average difference between them is still in the double digits. It's 13 points. Could she make that up in a week? Sure, she could. I don't think she's going to, however. Governor Sununu has been very active on her behalf. But I don't think that he is able to get her the votes from the demographics that she needs. And I really think that everything we've seen with Trump, go back and think about 2016, his support is always underestimated. His supporters don't act the way that other regular, activists and supporters do. No matter what the weather is, no matter what the attacks are, no matter what happens in the courtroom over the next 7 days, his people, 100% of them, will turn out. I don't see that enthusiasm for Nikki Haley.
What about Governor Sununu? And I wonder if this affects things, because Governor Sununu is a surrogate for Nikki Haley. He's endorsed her. He's going out and telling everyone, vote for Nikki Haley. But at the same time, he's saying that if Nikki Haley doesn't win, he's going to vote for Donald Trump no matter if he's convicted, no matter the criminal investigations. What does that say to voters here?
Well, and Nikki Haley says the same thing, and I think that's a big stumbling block for her. If anybody who hasn't already decided, if they're looking for an anti-Trump alternative, and you're out there saying, "Hey, I'm a better choice than Trump, but I'm going to vote for Trump if he wins," that's really hard to get over. And both she and her loudest, surrogate, they are saying that in every interview, everywhere they go. That's been a problem from the beginning of this primary. And I think that you see that in New Hampshire in the way that the votes have sort of settled in now as well. Now, for Nikki Haley, I heard you talking about this a little while ago, Nikki Haley and DeSantis, what does she need? Does she need to beat Trump in New Hampshire to move on? She has to beat at least everyone but Trump and be really, really close to him. And double digits don't count. Her message hasn't been that Trump is awful and I'm great. Her message has been, I can win. If she can't prove that she can win, if she comes in third in Iowa and comes in second in New Hampshire, and she's still pretty far behind in her own home state, she loses that message. And she has set herself up in a way where she doesn't have a fallback to a message number two. A message number two.
If Donald Trump wins,
I apologize, I have a little cold.
If Donald Trump wins, oh yeah, no, everybody has a cold. Don't worry. If Donald Trump wins Iowa and New Hampshire, it's hard to see who could possibly come out. It's hard to see the nomination going anywhere but for Donald Trump after these two states. Jen
That's
Horn,
exactly right.
I hope you feel better. Thank you very much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Appreciate it. Coming up, what the White House is asking Israel to do now. First, though, what happens when the caucus meets a force more powerful than politics? The turnout impact on one of the coldest nights in Iowa history. The Iowa caucus begins in 3.5 hours. With 6 months of campaigning behind them, the candidates are trying to cram in some final face time. Ron DeSantis is making a final few stops, currently right now in Sergeant Bluffs. Nikki Haley is at a diner in Pella. And Donald Trump is presumably somewhere warm as his son and congressional allies like Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, and Marjorie Taylor Greene are in Fort Dodge holding a last-minute campaign event for him. But the biggest story out of Iowa right now, other than Marjorie Taylor Greene's jacket, is the weather and the negative 45-degree wind chills that are expected to blow through tonight. Joining us now from Ankeny, Iowa, NBC News correspondent Garrett Haake on the road, currently driving from Fort Dodge to Des Moines. Oh, actually, you're not driving any longer. Vaughn, you're stationary. Vaughn Hilliard joins us, also in Des Moines, NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns. That was very cute the way you said that. All right, Garrett, give me an update on Donald Trump. Why is he not giving any FaceTime today like the other candidates are?
Well, the bottom line, Katie, is because he doesn't feel like he has to. The lead that he has built up in this state across poll after poll for the last several months is something that could ultimately lead to breaking a record tonight, although we do expect to see his son, Donald Trump Jr., where I am right now in Ankeny, just north of Des Moines. But if you look at where Donald Trump and his allies have been over the last 2 days, it's in, Webster County, Warren County, Polk County, where I am. Counties won by Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and Marco Rubio in that order back in 2016. And it speaks to the way Donald Trump's been able to consolidate support across the breadth of the Republican Party here in Iowa, whether it's evangelical voters who broke for Cruz last time. Our poll says they now support him. Whether it's new caucus goers, be they young or new to this process, really from across the kind of rural expanse of Iowa going for Donald Trump, or even more educated voters like the suburbanites here in Ankeny who went for Marco Rubio last time. They are building, they believe, a broad coalition that they hope will continue to show up tonight and not be distracted by either complacency from what the polling has shown or by the cold. Although you mentioned negative 45. Katie, it's a dry cold.
All right, I'll take your word for it. Vaughn, let me ask you about, Garrett touched on who Donald Trump is trying to get out there. You were able to talk to some voters. One of the groups that the campaign says it's focused on is new caucus goers, new caucus balloters. What are you hearing from people on their eagerness to get out there, even in these frigid temperatures?
Right, Katie. I mean, if we go back, first of all, 8 years ago in 2016, we were taken aback by just how many new first-time caucus goers there were in 2016. The record for that GOP turnout in 2016 shattered any other Republican caucus ever. The previous record was 120,000. In 2016, it was 186,000. But the Trump campaign says there's a heck of a lot more people that they are able to mobilize and have already identified as would-be first-time caucus goers this time around. Take a listen to two of the women who I just met who are in that exact circumstance right now. 8 years ago, who did you caucus for?
Okay, I didn't caucus.
I didn't either.
But this is why I am
did not.
this year.
Yes.
Trump. Otherwise, it would have been Trump.
What are you guys hearing from family and friends in terms of support for Trump versus Haley and DeSantis?
Oh, Trump. Completely Trump. Completely.
Do you guys know anybody who is going to caucus for Haley or DeSantis?
No. Yes, I do. Yes. And I'm going to try to switch them over.
The last Republican caucus, Katie, that you and I covered is a very different one here in 2024. And that's why at this event, we wanted to drive up to Fort Dodge. We're about 2 hours north of Des Moines. You could call it the superstar cast, the superstar MAGA cast of Trump loyalists. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Byron Donalds, Carrie Lake, Jim Jordan. Each of them have been speaking here for about the last 2 hours now here at this event, at one of these final Trump campaign events, to try to activate the folks here in the northern part of the state.
Vaughn, you're in Fort Dodge. All right, let's, Dasha, talk about Ron DeSantis. He's been tempering expectations for months and months and months. He said he was going to win Iowa. He's got all the endorsements that Iowa would want. You know, he's got the religious endorsements. He's got the governor there. Now he's calling himself the underdog and saying that he's going to do well. What's behind that change?
Well, first of all, Katie, I think it is your coat that should be making headlines right now, just for being absolutely fabulous. Though I dare you to come and host a show here in Iowa in these temperatures outside right now. Look, right now he is crisscrossing the state. He's going from Sergeant Bluffs to Council Bluffs to Cedar Rapids. Then he'll make his way right here to West Des Moines, where he's holding his watch party tonight, where he'll be watching the results come in. And you're right, the narrative has really changed. I mean, take a step back, Katie, and, you know, I'm old enough to remember, because it wasn't really that long ago, that he was the rising star in the Republican Party, the guy everybody thought could actually potentially beat Donald Trump in the Republican primary. Now, not only is he not within striking distance of the former president, but he's fighting it out for second place, not just nationally, but here in Iowa, where he has gone all in with all of his resources, with all of the right endorsements. And so no doubt tonight he is hoping against all odds for a second place. Here are two factors, though, that might actually help him make that happen: the weather and his organization in this state, because they started organizing here early last year. They started identifying and recruiting those precinct captains. They hired a ton of staff here. They moved a ton of staff here. That might be the difference between second and third place for them, because of these frigid temperatures and because of the way caucuses work. You know, it's not just a regular voting day, a regular primary where you go in, you check the box, and you leave. You have to get there at a certain time. You have to listen to the speeches. You have to go through this whole process. And that's where they think that they might have an advantage because of all of the work that they put in here. But again, an advantage to get into second instead of third, not into first place, which he was saying, you know, just months ago, confidently, I'm going to win Iowa. Yeah. Now he's the underdog.
It is -2 where you are in West Des Moines. The weather is a factor. How is it going to affect turnout? But even if there is record turnout, so the weather is a non-factor, and 200,000 Republicans show up to caucus. There are 800,000 registered Republicans in Iowa. That means just 1/4 of the registered Republicans in that state are going to choose who moves on. Not very many people. Dasha Burns, Vaughn Hilliard, Garrett Haake, thank you very much. And coming up, what exactly is a caucus again? NBC's Jacob Soboroff is back in Iowa to explain how it all works, says only Jacob Soboroff can. Today marks 101 days since Hamas attacked and slaughtered more than 1,200 people in Israel on October 7th, the worst violence against Jews since the Holocaust. In that time, Israel has waged a punishing war in Gaza, which has killed more than 24,000 people. Now, NBC News reports the White House is telling Israel it is time to scale back. Joining us now from Tel Aviv is NBC News correspondent Raf Sanchez. So how is that message falling on Benjamin Netanyahu's ears, Raf?
Well, we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu over the weekend, Katie, marking that 100-day mark. And he says Israel will continue fighting to what he calls total victory, and that Israel will not be forced into stopping its campaign by the U.S., by the International Court of Justice, by the international community. We've heard Netanyahu define his war aims. He says he wants to destroy Hamas, he wants to free the hostages. But it's notable, Katie, 100 days into this war, it is still not clear what the Israeli government's plan is for Gaza after Hamas We have seen the Israeli military scaling back its operations. They say they're mostly finished. Their operations in the north, in the south, they say they are trying to be more surgical. But we are still seeing more than 100 Palestinians killed every day, according to the health ministry in Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas. And we're hearing today from the United Nations that the window to avert wide-scale famine in Gaza is running out. The UN says not enough trucks are getting through, there are not enough crossings open, and that there is simply too much fighting going on to actually deliver the aid to the people who need it most inside Gaza. Katie.
Let me also ask you about what's happening in the Red Sea. The U.S. and the U.K. and other nations did calculated strikes on Yemen and the Houthis to try to deter them from continuing to attack ships in the Red Sea, but they're still doing so. What happened today?
They're still doing so. So Central Command, the U.S. military command, saying that earlier today the Houthis fired a ballistic missile that hit an American-owned cargo ship off the southern coast of Yemen. That ship, the Gibraltar Eagle, suffering damage, no injuries. It was able to continue on its journey. But, Katie, it really underscores that the U.S. and the U.K. launched 100 missiles against Houthi sites on Friday. They followed up with more strikes on Saturday. The goal of this operation, according to President Biden, was to deter the Houthis from attacking ships in the Red Sea. And they are not deterred, clearly. They took responsibility proudly for this attack on this American-owned ship. And they say that these strikes will continue until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And the risk of escalation continues every day that there is this shooting. Yesterday, the Houthis fired a missile towards an American warship in the Red Sea. That was intercepted by an American fighter jet. But it feels like it's a matter of time before this potentially escalates further. Katie.
Raf Sanchez. Raf, thank you very much. And still ahead, the nomination contests officially start tonight. But will Donald Trump really be on the ballot in all 50 states? An update on the court case that could disqualify him across the country. First, though, if you were asking yourself, how does the Iowa caucus work again? Well, we have that answer. NBC's Jacob Soboroff is inside a caucus super site to show us. It is January of an election year, which means it's that time again when the country starts scratching its head to remember how exactly a caucus works. Good thing NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff is back in Iowa and back in his mustard yellow corduroy button-down to help us work it out.
So later this evening, this is where all of the residents of the county are going to come. And on that stage, they are going to hear speeches from the different campaigns to convince them ultimately to come out and caucus, maybe as many as 1,000 people. But this isn't where the caucus itself goes down. Come with me. This is Ottumwa High School, as I told you. It dates to about 1923. It is an incredible place. They just actually celebrated their 100-year anniversary, as you can see right here. Go Bulldogs. What they're going to do is they're all going to come down these stairs. And the caucus is a little bit different from the Democratic caucus, which no longer happens, and everybody's in the same room. Here, there's 22 different precincts in what's known as a super caucus location. Everybody from the different parts of this county are going to come down this hallway into classrooms, as a matter of fact. So, for instance, there's classroom 120 right over here. Usually, you can see on the walls here, it's a Spanish classroom, but this evening, it is going to be a singular precinct location. You're going to take your ballot, you're going to put it in the ballot box, and they're going to count those ballots in this room. But this is not where the official results are tabulated. That happens over here. Come with me. Ultimately, this place, like it was back in 2016, may very well prove interesting to the results and important to look at, because President Trump won particularly big here by about 36 percentage points, maybe 35 percentage points. Back then, we're going to look at the margin ultimately and see how he does here tonight. If it's bigger, that'll be pretty interesting and indicative of some kind of shift. And if it's smaller, obviously the same in the opposite direction. All the results from the classrooms are going to be brought down here into the cafeteria. They're going to tabulate the results. They're actually going to have a big whiteboard here in the cafeteria, and that's where the results ultimately are going to be presented to the public. We'll get the results here for the county and ultimately the results for Iowa itself.
My friend Jacob has been wearing that jacket for so long, for 8 years ago now, except 8 years ago when he first started wearing it, it was buttoned. Okay, coming up, more than 30 states have challenged Donald Trump's name on the ballot. What the Supreme Court will consider. Donald Trump may be primed for a win in Iowa tonight, but the question of his eligibility on the ballot is still pending. Right now, there are lawsuits in more than a dozen states brought by challengers who claim former President Donald Trump is ineligible to serve as president under the 14th Amendment. Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney in Michigan and MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuaid. So we know a lot about Colorado, that successful suit that state, or challengers in that state brought, that is now in front of the Supreme Court. What are these other states doing?
Well, we just most recently saw in Oregon where the Supreme Court there said, we're going to deny this request for now, but without prejudice, meaning you can bring it again, because the Supreme Court is about to decide this issue. And so let's all hold on and see what happens there. But as you know, California has rejected challenges. Maine has said Donald Trump's ineligible from the ballot. In Michigan and Minnesota, they declined to answer on procedural rulings. So it's kind of a mess. Different decisions all over the country. Everybody's waiting for the Supreme Court to really decide whether Donald Trump is eligible to serve as president again.
So, you know, in trying to figure out what the Supreme Court's going to decide, I wonder what they're going to consider beyond the text of the Constitution, which Amendment 14, Article 3 says, if you participate in insurrection or give aid and comfort to anybody who has, you can't be president. It's written broadly. I know it's a statute that was added after the Civil War, but it doesn't say any Confederate soldiers. It doesn't say if you participated in the Civil War specifically, if they were specifically intending it for that purpose. It's very broadly written. So if you are predicting what the justices in the Supreme Court might consider, how do they read that?
Yeah, so if you know, they're textualists. They say they look to the text. And so it talks about engaging in insurrection by an officer of the United States. It would seem that Donald Trump fits all of those qualifications. But, Katie, there are a lot of procedural ways that the court could sort of take an off-ramp here, is the phrase people are using, avoid addressing this question head-on. And one of those is something called the political questions doctrine. We have seen the court use this doctrine when it wants to avoid questions it deems too political, that this belongs in other branches of government. For example, when it comes to gerrymandering to give one party an advantage over another, the courts have held that is non-judiciable, that is a matter for legislatures to work out. And so in the same way, one thing they could do here is to say, this is not for the courts, this is for Congress to decide whether Donald Trump can be seated. What's crazy about that is he could be elected president, and then Congress could say in January of 2025, you're not eligible. You can't take your seat. So really interesting
let me push back
consequences here.
Let me push back on that for a second, because also written in the wording of that that amendment is that the only remedy for this, to disqualify somebody, would be for Congress to overrule it. So doesn't that imply that this is not an issue that's up to Congress? The remedy is up to Congress if you want to put them back on the ballot. But the issue of whether they can be on the ballot or not is not a congressional issue if you're going to read the wording in the Constitution.
Yes, and that is the argument that certainly is being advocated, that says this is self-executing. You know, there's some who are saying that this provision is not valid and not able to be implemented until Congress passes some sort of enabling legislation. But that language certainly flies in the face of that. It suggests that the default is ineligibility, and that's the reason that they've got this ability to erase it and change the default.
I don't know how they're going to read it, but if you're going to be a textualist or an originalist, I imagine you would have to hew pretty closely to the words in the Constitution. Barbara McQuaid, really good to have you. Thank you so much. And that is going to do it for me today. Stay right here with MSNBC to catch special coverage of the Iowa caucus. Rachel Maddow leads analysis with Steve Kornacki, breaking down the results at the big board. It's a big election night, so of course he's there. I'm going to join the coverage with reporting from right here in Manchester, New Hampshire. That is tonight, beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. Please do tune in for that. Special election coverage with Jen Psaki starts right now.